One of the most common responses to feminist frequency, and indeed to feminism in general, is the claim that feminism is dead. One might imagine that such a claim would involve a comprehensive examination of society to determine whether or not women have achieved equality with men, but don't hold your breath. The three ways people attempt to address the issue of feminism in response to feminist frequency are: number one, claim that women already have their rights and nothing more needs to be done, what I call the first wave argument. Number two, deny oppression altogether. Number three, admit that there is sexism in the world but trivialize what Anita is trying to do by pointing to bigger problems elsewhere. In other words, the first world problems argument.
The goal is to make feminists and our movements look completely ridiculous, over the top, and unnecessary.
Which it is.
Oh, fight for women's rights. What more rights do you want? You have the right to vote. That, you were given that. You have the right to work. You were given that, and I'm happy you were given that. That's awesome. I like it how girls can work and girls have all these rights. What more do you want? You're treated as complete equals. It's like you wanted to be treated better than men. That's your goal in this, is to be treated better than men. And I thought what you wanted was equality.
And I don't even know if you've done your research. Do you even know where women's rights come from? Women's rights come from the same place I do, sweetheart. Seneca Falls, New York. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, Lucretia Mott, Judy Blumer. They all wanted rights to vote. They all figured, we're human beings, our voices should be heard too. So of course, they all got together, they pulled together, and they made it happen. All those wonderful ladies put together this council, and they fought to get women's rights. Well, look at that. We have them.
Once again, I'm sorry, feminists, you have the same rights and privileges and everything else that I do in this society, but I'm sorry, you just are not bigger and stronger than us. Sorry, that's not me being sexist, that is just genetics.
It is a trivialization of feminism. Original feminists fought for very valiant things that they should have and did need. Things like voting rights, things like the right to the same education and work opportunities that men have. That is what they fought for. They fought for equal pay. They fought for social acceptance and sexual liberation. Those are the things that the original feminists fought for. Modern feminists, however, fight to eradicate, subdue, and/or snuff out everything that is inherently masculine.
And first I'm going to look at the feminist tactics I've noticed. The first one being deliberately vague about things. You know, someone will ask them, what kind of equality are you looking for? And they'll go, political, social, economical, basically listing words that end in all. And they might as well just say, you know, we want equality, we want the equal kind of equality, because they've got nothing to say, they've got nothing to point out, so they just make it sound like there's lots of big issues without actually naming any. They've just gone social, political, economical.
What these people are generally pointing to is a difference between first wave and second wave feminism. Moreover, assuming that we define feminism in a Western sense of equality for women, the point of contention here seems to be over what defines equality. Are political rights the only measure of equality? I think that we need a little bit of a history lesson here. First wave feminism is generally considered to be the movement for women's suffrage. Women gained the right to vote in 1920. Women's reproductive rights were also a major issue of first-wave feminism. First-wave feminism achieved major legal successes. For the moment, feminist objectives seemed to be achieved, but as time passed, women became frustrated by the fact that they continued to be on the political, economic, and social margins. This is where the question of what is the measure of equality comes into play. If women had the right to vote but held few positions of political and economic power, then could they really be said to be equal? Second-wave feminism grew out of the protest movements of the 1960s. This marked a shift from explicitly political goals such as suffrage towards cultural goals. For a solid and concise explanation of second-wave feminism, I would recommend the lecture series Interpreting the 20th Century, the specific lecture titled Global Women's Movements. In the lecture, the speaker explains that second-wave feminism was influenced by thinkers such as Herman Marcuse and others towards a more cultural view of women's problems. To quote from the lecture, "As Marcuse argued, true liberation had been prevented by cultural systems that imprisoned us. Even where no legal or political discrimination remained, the discrimination within cultural systems kept us from being perfectly free to act. So this opened the door to second wave's feminism's focus on cultural attitudes that kept women in traditional roles. In other words, the kinds of cultural attitudes that were embodied in advertising, in popular images, in television shows, and the kinds of toys that were marketed to boys and girls. All that range of things." End quote. Notice anything about this quote? This lecture series predates Feminist Frequency's videos and yet predicts her entire project. I should add here that Feminist Frequency is actually a third-wave feminist. Third-wave feminism is in some ways a critique of prior feminism's focus on the problems of middle-class white women. Instead, third-wave feminists attempt to expand the scope by looking at issues of race, class, sexual orientation, ability, and so on. This is noteworthy in part because modern feminism's focus on ideas like overlapping systems of oppression often include topics that affect men. Here's an example.
But when it's a man painted negatively, you don't refer to it as a negative stereotype. In your mind, it seems to be genuine.
Notice here that he's using an image of a slovenly Homer Simpson. While he is male, Homer would also fall under negative stereotypes of class. The media is rife with negative stereotypes of lower and working class people, when they're depicted at all. It's not merely enough to view Homer as a male. We have to examine him within the context of socioeconomics. While the focus of modern feminism is still on women's issues such as reproductive rights, it is also informed by a broader view of social systems, so it is more flexible but also more difficult to articulate. In other words, modern feminism indeed has more to say about so-called men's problems than one might imagine. Now this is where I have to offer my own criticism of feminist frequencies. The content of her videos often seems to assume that her goals are self-evident to the average person, when in fact they are not. Here are some of the main reasons that modern feminism has such an uphill battle. First, as indicated by the quote I read, modern feminism largely centers around scrutinizing aspects of society people usually take for granted. This means that it involves confronting people's commonly held beliefs, and there is often a knee-jerk reaction against this. If people spend their entire lives thinking something is normal, then their belief will not be easily shaken. Second, examining culture often requires an educational background that the general public lacks. Third, as feminism grows in complexity, it becomes more difficult to explain what it stands for, becomes easier to strawman, and gains internal contradictions as different feminists come to different conclusions. It can no longer be summarized with tidy sayings that fit on a placard like votes for women. Fourth, although it's a straw man to define feminism in terms of its fringe, the radical elements of feminism are real and have done serious damage to the public perception of the movement. Fifth, and lastly, the growing backlash against feminism has spread misconceptions like wildfire. I cannot stress this enough. The question of the relevance of modern feminism should come down to an actual look at women's status in the world, and not cherry-picked examples of what people think is trivial or radical. I, for one, believe that modern feminism has legitimacy because as I look around my society, I can see that women are simply not taken as seriously as men, especially in positions of leadership. This is but one of numerous problems. We still take polls asking questions like, would you vote for a woman for president if she were qualified? And while the number has moved towards 90%, the same question, if asked about men, would be taken as a joke. Media images contribute to an epidemic of eating disorders, primarily amongst women in Western societies. Entire industries are male-dominated and often hostile to women. The list goes on. This does not, however, mean that I think that all of society's problems are limited to women. Our society's concepts of masculinity can be quite harmful to men as well. Racism still exists in our society. Really, there's no shortage of bigotry and oppression to go around. The question becomes, do we need movements to fight for change?
The straw feminist is set up to perpetuate and advance the myth that feminism is no longer needed, that we've arrived at gender equality, and anyone who disagrees is quickly demeaned and portrayed as an extremist.
The second way people try to undercut the validity of feminism is to have the attitude of oppression? What oppression?
Women are being institutionally oppressed all the time in nearly every facet of our lives.
This claim is absurdly false. As I have explained in a previous video, oppression is where there is an authority, whether institutional or cultural, which acts as a burden upon your freedom. Women in the Western world are not denied any freedoms given to men.
Now the problem with this is that there are many men, like myself, who are sick and tired of hearing women complain about women's injustices and how things hurt them, as if they're oppressed in some way in the year 2012. Women are not oppressed in any way in the United States. And when people see things like this, they get annoyed. It's understandable. I don't know why people don't get this yet. There is no legitimate evidence of any oppression that cannot be shut down with ease.
I watched most of it, and basically it just boils down to this. She doesn't like the way that women are portrayed in this, and this somehow reinforces the patriarchy, and this somehow is a truly bad thing because of Cupcake.
First of all, it's not the 1920s anymore. Like, I know there are things like domestic abuse and children sold as sex slaves, and I know those are definitely problems and are, that is discrimination against women. I know there's a lot of that, but there's none in the gaming industry.
The trope is a tool that's used to promote the fallacy that everyone is already equal.
Which they are.
These clips seem indicative of a failure to grasp what modern feminism stands for. Allow me to replay part of a clip.
Oppression is where there is an authority, whether institutional or cultural, which acts as a burden upon your freedom.
Note that he mentions cultural authority. Now think about what Anita is saying. She is arguing that cultural ideas about what women are supposed to be, which are spread through popular culture, limit women in the real world by influencing how people regard women. If culture does act to limit women in the real world, then that is oppression by the definition he gives. Again, people have extreme difficulty being objective about their own culture because it forms the basis of the worldview which they operate from. Examining the impact of culture on the individual also requires a level of abstraction some people just might not be capable of, or don't have the educational background to deal with. Finally, note that it is men here who are saying that women aren't oppressed in any way, as if they know something about experiencing life as a woman in our society. The third tactic used is directed towards Anita personally, by trying to trivialize what she does with a "it's just first world problems" attitude.
I think we have to look at modern feminist campaigns. Do they campaign for rights that should be unalienable, or do they campaign for preferential treatment? Are women in the 21st century West denied any rights that should be unalienable? And if equality hasn't been achieved in law already, are feminists doing anything to ensure that it is? Well, ostensibly, it appears not.
I mean, there's actual shit in the world that matters. Real suffering. I mean, yeah, there's real sexism, but all the stuff that you're pointing to is basically just... I don't have words to describe how irrelevant it is.
I don't think she's once ever talked about real issues involving women's rights, like segregation in Saudi Arabia, and the fact that in some countries women are still forced to marry their rapist, or even killed because they got raped. But no, she attacks Lego and video games, something that someone who really cared about human rights would not give two fucks about.
You don't care about women's rights. You want to know how I know this? Because you've never once spoken about a real issue regarding real women in actual situations where it's unfair to them. Ever.
If you want a real example of women being downtrodden in terms of human rights and low self-esteem, look at countries where feminists like Anita never speak about, such as Saudi Arabia. There you will find true oppression. There you will find the so-called patriarchy.
As previously mentioned, I think feminism is about as much use as a cock-flavoured lollipop. All they seem to do nowadays is accuse men of being rapists and complaining about hardcore pornography.
The two problems that I have with the channel are that, one, a lot of the issues aren't really important issues, I guess you could say. But you could go out and you could talk about issues in different countries, or even if you want to just focus on America, you can talk about how, you talk about the glass ceiling and everything. But really what she honestly goes out and does is talk about a lot of the, stereotypes and tropes that show up in pop culture and Hollywood.
Or as I like to call it, a woman complaining about something that isn't that important at the end of the day.
Seriously, the only person who actually cares of women being side characters and being main characters that are too sexy for their own look is you, Feminist Frequency. Housewives don't care. Fucking children don't care. Even other feminists don't fucking care.
I consider Anita's work to be heavily one-sided and also highly trivial. After all, women aren't harmed during the making of video games, and no one is forcing you to buy or play video games in the first place. These aren't women's rights issues, they're just trivial complaints.
If you agree with the message of this video, please like and share it to remind people like Rebecca Watson, Anita Sarkeesian, and other mainstream feminists that there are more important issues facing women today that need to be addressed than their hypersensitivity to trivial first world problems.
Lots of feminists do care about these issues. Some of them teach classes like Women in Afghanistan. But Anita talks about Western media because that's what she studied and that's what she's interested in. It's just that simple. It should also be noted that American movies, TV shows, and other forms of entertainment actually reach a global audience, and we can see effects on those societies as well. Attempting to shift the discussion to more important issues is really just an attempt to trivialize the issues she brings up without actually addressing them. More importantly, though, this argument is self-defeating. If held to the standard of addressing the worst possible problems in society, most things most people do most of the time would seem rather trivial. This includes people attacking Feminist Frequency videos. The hubris of people arguing online never ceases to amaze me. They will advance self-defeating arguments and then claim intellectual victory. If what Anita is doing is so trivial, then why are people so fired up to attack and discredit her? Ponder that. Moreover, it is worth asking what feminists in the West can do to solve problems in other countries. There is a fine line between concern for the human rights of others and cultural chauvinism. Case in point, Femen's Topless Jihad. Femen is a group based out of the Ukraine and other countries that has protested against the Catholic Church, the President of Russia, and other causes. Last year, a young Tunisian woman posted pictures of herself on Facebook with the words, "Fuck your morals," and "My body belongs to me and is not the source of anyone's honor" on her topless chest. Her arrest led to Femen staging what they called topless jihad with protests aimed at Islam and Muslim countries. The reaction from Muslim women was, "Thank you, white European women, for coming to save us." No, wait, actually, the reaction was the exact opposite of that. The backlash took the form of Muslim women against Femen, who accused the group of being, amongst other things, imperialist and racist. They insisted that it was their right to wear the hijab and questioned equating feminism with nudity. The lesson we can learn here is that when you go around trying to impose your values on other societies, that maybe, just maybe, you will not be greeted as liberators. In particular relevance to discussing feminist frequency is the fact that our media is the primary lens through which other societies view the West. Many of you have probably seen the graphic I am now displaying on the screen. The image our media projects to the rest of the world is that women are constantly sexualized for men's benefit. Is it any wonder then that people in other cultures might not rush to emulate us, or that feminists in our own society might take issue with it? Perhaps our society is not the pillar of equality that we imagine it to be. Finally, to return to what I said at the beginning of the video, no serious assessment of the modern relevance of feminism can happen without taking a look at the state of our own society. I think that one of the reasons that feminist frequency is such a popular target is because that what she is talking about is somewhat specialized and abstract. Examinations in the media are only one subset of feminism. By holding up feminist frequency as the apotheosis of feminism, they are punctuating a cherry-picked straw man with a thought-terminating cliche. Their line of reasoning seems to be, people like feminist frequency are the embodiment of feminism. What she does is not important because the media is just entertainment. Therefore, feminism is irrelevant. How might we fairly evaluate the relevance of modern feminism? It's replay clip time.
That is what they fought for. They fought for equal pay. They fought for social acceptance and sexual liberation. Those are the things that the original feminists fought for.
So these things have all been achieved, right? Do women have equal pay, social acceptance, sexual liberation, work opportunities? The pay gap is, of course, a controversial subject, but studies continue to find that not all of the pay gap can be explained away by men and women's choices. Even if you could explain away the pay gap by different choices, feminists also fight against the rigid gender roles within our society that lead to a male breadwinner, female homemaker dichotomy. In other words, even if it were true that you could explain away the wage gap by choices, women in general are being put at a disadvantage by being expected to do unpaid housework, while men are being freed from such burdens to put in extra time at paid jobs. What about sexual liberation? Are women free from all sexual double standards? What about social acceptance? Are women now taken as seriously as men? Why do women have to face disproportionate harassment, from harassing comments online to assault and groping in public? Why does our society still take a victim-blaming mentality towards rape, when even the mainstream media will lament that a couple of rapists had their oh-so-bright futures ruined by an act they deserve to be in jail for? People decry women being forced to wear a burqa in other countries, and yet the rationale for doing so is that men are so lustful that they just can't help themselves. And we see this exact same attitude prevalent in our own society when people claim that there's a connection between how a woman dresses and being raped. This person completely forgot to mention reproductive rights. No one's attacking those, right? If women have equal career opportunities, then what explains the fact that entire fields from politics to entertainment are heavily male-dominated? Equality means equality in reality, not hypothetical equality. So until it's the case that you can show that women have achieved equality in reality, feminism is not irrelevant or trivial.
While we see the straw feminist over and over again in television and movies, it's also unfortunately deployed on a regular basis by American talk shows and news pundits. Mainstream religious and conservative news media often attack women with deliberate misrepresentations and extreme exaggerations of what feminism is. This false impression has been infused into the mainstream by popular talk show hosts such as Michael Savage, Glenn Beck, and Bill O'Reilly. You may have heard the slur feminazi, popularized by Rush Limbaugh, a term used to discredit and demonize any woman fighting for social equality.
The feminists, the feminazis, have been working for years to this end. Advance women by diminishing men.
Yeah. The straw feminist is set up to perpetuate and advance the myth that feminism is no longer needed, that we've arrived at gender equality, and anyone who disagrees is quickly demeaned and portrayed as an extremist. This trope represents a backlash against feminism and groups supporting women's rights. As we make more gains towards equality, the backlash gets stronger. It's an old yet effective tactic, but clearly it's working because I often hear young women saying, "I believe in the equal rights of women, but I'm not a feminist." This sentiment is a direct result of the straw feminist trope because women want to distance themselves from the extreme and false representations they're seeing in TV, movies, and talk shows. We need to proudly claim the title and fight back against the distorted and demeaning representations in the media and in real life. And if y'all really do believe in the equality of women, then we need to continue this long legacy of feminism and fight for it.